And we're back. I got electricity. This is a great thing. Time once again for a meeting of the Clyde Sukeforth chapter of SABR. I am Bruce McClure, the chapter chair, and we always hold our meetings in conjunction with the Gardner Waterman chapter of SABR in Vermont. Dr. Clayton Truder, chair. He had electricity last week, too. Go figure. Hey, let's get this started in the traditional way with Joanne Hulbert and a poem. Joanne, how are you?
I'm good. And I did a lot of research for this one. Um, I did actually find a Deadball Era poem that was about Marlin, Texas, and the Giants and all that. But because you have kind of added a little excitement tonight in regard to the speaker, I do want to read a poem that is one of the best poems that we have received for Turnstile, the Journal of Baseball Arts. Anyway, this goes way back because it's like 5 or 6, 7 months that we had the first volume of it, but there was a poem in it which we really thought was one of the best we've ever received. The title of it is The Books Must Balance, November 15th. Laugh you must. Anyway, this is one of the best we've had. Here it is. The books must balance, so accountants say. For every credit on the books, we must record a debt. Bills come in, we pay them off and write it down. In baseball, just the same is true. A hit is chalked up to the hitter and the pitcher both. A game won by my team must be a loss for you. If we give credit, we must give blame. For every Thompson, Branca, there must be a Mazeroski, Terry, Gibson, Eck, Gordon, and Familia recently, then Hosmer, Duda, Perez, Matz. Ah, heck. The calculus of baseball can be cold, but books must balance once the tale is told. This
Love it.
poem was
Love it.
written by the author R.J. Lesch, which is
Ah,
only
very
reasonable
good.
that we should be reading this tonight. And it is still one of the best ones that we've received. You know, I'm not trying to you know, dismay anybody who has sent in another poem, but this one really was one of our first ones that we got, and it's one of the ones we continue to think that it's at the top of our list. So thank you, RJ. And not
Thank
only
you.
that, I will say one thing. I have been badgering and nagging you every time that I would see you, like at conventions and whatever, to please, would you send some more poems?
I I I was on a 4 or 5 year kick where I was writing baseball sonnets and then I just dried up. I don't know why that happened, but
Oh,
I
that's
will I will see if the muse will wake.
okay. All right. We will be at the ready to accept anything that you sent in. So don't feel as though there's pressure on you because that door is always open.
Thank you.
All right, Joanne, you open the door, so I'm going to walk right through it. Why don't you tell us when the next turnstile is coming out and how people can submit
Okay.
poetry to that
All right.
book?
Turnstile 5 is in the process of being edited this month. So we hope to get that out. Now, it's a large number of submissions that we have in this particular T5. So we're expecting we might have to do a little shaving to move over to T6 because actually we have started to accept some submissions for Turnstile 6, which is this year's in 2026. How nice that works out. That we will be starting to work on those. So we're waiting to get T5 out. I know that has been very much delayed because of various problems that we've had with getting the work laid out and edited. We didn't have the same number of people this year for that book that we had in previous ones. So there's been a little bit of a glitch there. So, but apparently we are going to be starting to get that rolling. Supposedly it is going to be published in February, but we really don't want to say that that's etched in stone. So, but that one is in process, but we are now accepting for T6, we want memoir, creative fiction, poetry, artwork, things along that line. We are not really interested in getting like analysis of certain sports events and all that. We have other SABR publications for things like that. This one is basically for arts. So consider what you want to add into it. I know that Molly has taken the plunge as well. So please consider writing up something. There you go.
There you go. There you go. If you would like to submit a poem or a piece of artwork to the next publication, contact Joanne today.
Yep, that's right.
I want to move to the man, the legend, Joe Ross. Mr. Ross, good sir, unmute yourself, my man. Tell me your favorite thing about today in baseball history.
Thank you, and Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year.
Actually, this one is an interesting tidbit, especially if you're a Red Sox fan or maybe a Red Sox enemy.
Which Joe is not a Red Sox fan.
I am too. That's really not true. On this date in 1920,
Babe Ruth.
Babe Ruth actually signed his deal for $40,000. That was over 2 years, incidentally, with the New York dreadful Yankees. Sorry about that. We all remember, of course, that he started this, or this started because the owner of the Red Sox wanted to do a Broadway production called No Nanette, which he did with a loan based on giving Ruth to the Yankees. Ruth made more appearances than No Nanette did, and probably made more money than No Nanette did. But that's what happened today in baseball history.
So interestingly enough, Joe, I've actually seen No Nanette. I saw it performed at Northeastern. This goes back, I don't know, 20 or 25 years or so. It was done there by a theater group that did a pretty good job. It was a very slimmed down production of the show, but I've actually seen it. Here's one for you, Joe. Let me ask you, I don't know if you or anybody else here knows anything about Broadway. When was the last time that No Nanette was mounted on Broadway? You wouldn't believe it if I told you.
That I don't know, but I know it was successful. It was a successful play. Not as successful as Babe Ruth was, but successful nevertheless.
True. Mark says I have the show on vinyl, and that's right. It is out on vinyl. It was done. Troy Olszewski in the chat, didn't they revive it relatively recently, like 10 years ago? The last time No Nanette was mounted on Broadway was actually 1971.
Oh.
Before that, it was on Broadway in 1925. I have now shown Jeff was close. I have now shown my theater nerd chops. Do not ask me to recite Rent by Rote because I can do that. It is an illness. We're just going to leave it at that. And I am going to quickly, before somebody starts in on me, go to Jeff Cohen. Thanks, Joe. Hey, Jeff, you've got 2 podcasts to talk about.
I do. Yes.
So let it fly.
Okay. The first one, Baseball and BBQ. This week is only going to be baseball because we talk about the Hall of Fame. We have a panelist of Scott Crawford, who runs the Canadian Hall of Fame, Bill Chuck, who many of you may know. We have Brett Moore, who's a great performer, did a great play about one-man show about baseball. And we give our selections of who we think is going to be in the Hall of Fame so you can compare them to the actual announcement, which will be, I believe, on January 20th. The other podcast, believe it or not, is called the NYS Halls of Fame. It's about New York State baseball, hockey, and basketball Hall of Fames. It's run by me, Leonard Aberman, and Rennie LaRue, who runs those 3 Halls of Fames. And we bring on different guests every 2 weeks. And we've had on so far David Palmer of the Montreal Expos, and Mike Pagliarulo of the New York Yankees and Don Scala of the New York Yankees. So check them out. It's all on the Baseball and BBQ feed on all your podcast apps. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. All you got to do is set your podcatcher to grab both of those podcasts, and you will be thoroughly entertained and informed about baseball by listening to them. They're great shows. You're not going to want to miss them. They're both kind of long form shows. So sit down and get comfortable, get a beverage, and enjoy yourself.
Take a long road trip.
What's that?
Take a long road trip.
Take a long road trip. There you go. Drive to work slowly, whatever it might be. There you go. Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate you.
Thanks.
I didn't have this in the script tonight, but I'm going to jump in and put somebody on the spot here. Hey, Gary Mintz, can you unmute for just a moment, please?
There we go.
Gary, while I got you here, Gary is the president of the great New York Giants Preservation Society. What's going on with your Zooms in the next week or two?
Actually, we have one of your people on Thursday, Donna Muscarella from the Elysian Fields. She's going to be talking about Hinchcliffe Stadium, the Negro Leagues, and the former New York Giants who did appear at that stadium that has since been refurbished. So
that's great. You know, if you haven't heard Donna give that presentation, get into Gary's meeting this week. Drop him a note in the chat, and he'll be happy to send you a link to that. And you will be entertained and informed. Donna is a great presenter, a knowledgeable baseball fan, and frankly, a doggone fine chapter president as well. She has done extraordinary things down there, and we appreciate all that she's done. Gary, thank you very much. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right. On with our feature presentation. Here we go. For 11 years, John McGraw took his New York Giants to tiny Marlin, Texas for spring training. Other clubs had been there previously, but none for more than 2 years. So why did the Giants stay there for over a decade? Tonight's presentation uses contemporary data resources to place the Marlin experience featuring regimens designed by McGraw in the context of the evolution of spring training practices. SABR member R.J. Lesch is a business analyst living in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. He has been a White Sox fan since the Harry Caray days, and I am really sorry, R.J., I am really sorry, and is delighted to be a member of the Deadball Era and Baseball and the arts committees. RJ was the co-founder of the Field of Dreams chapter in Iowa and the Mathewson-Plank chapter in central Pennsylvania. Get this, ladies and gentlemen, he is an avid fencer and certified fencing coach, his specialty being the sabre. This can be confusing to family and friends, let alone me. RJ Lesch, welcome to Northern New England, my friend. How are you?
Thank you, and hello, Clydes. And what was the other chapter this is a joint event for?
The Gardner-Waterman chapter.
Gardner-Waterman
presents all of our meetings together with us. Clayton Truder, our chair up there, is a mysterious man and likes to fly under the radar.
Well, hello, Gardner-Waterman folks as well. So
it's all yours.
So some of you may have seen a version of this. I tried to freshen up the content a little bit, but I gave a version of this at the Texas SABR annual convention last summer. Next slide gives the title of a article that was in the National Pastime for edition for the Texas convention, spring training ballparks at Marlin, Texas. I contacted Monty Seeley, who is a member of the Hornsby chapter, prior to the about 2 weeks before the Texas chapter, or before the Texas convention, because I found online while I was brushing up on some of my research that he had done a PowerPoint presentation about 15 years earlier on the Giants experience in Marlin. And I looked at it, and he had a lot of things in his presentation that corrected errors that I was making in mine. So I reached out to him and said, are you going to be in Texas or at the convention? Because maybe you should be giving this talk instead of me. And he replied back, Well, no, I'm not going to be able to make the convention, but I do have an article in the publication. And I found this out 2 weeks before giving my presentation at the SABR convention. So I dodged a bullet there because I would have been repeating a lot of the same stuff that Monty's excellent article already covered. For purposes of this discussion, assuming that there were folks perhaps who might not have seen either this presentation or or Monty's article, although you can find it online, I would recommend taking a look at it. It's a great article, but I'll give the highlights of some of his findings as well. Going to the next slide so Marlin, Texas, before the Giants showed up, Texas became a state in 1845. 5 years later, the state legislature established Falls County, and made the town of Marlin, founded in Marlin, and made the town of Marlin the county seat. A fortuitous discovery of hot mineral water in Marlin made it possible to construct a bathhouse and to make Marlin a tourist destination. Hot mineral water was believed to have healing, was supposed to be good for your health, healing properties. Places like Hot Springs in West Baden and various other places had hot mineral springs. And Marlin decided to capitalize on this boon to their economy, so they constructed the bathhouse and the original Arlington Hotel. The Arlington burned down, but they built a new one in 1901. Now, going to the next slide. Here's the Sanborn map from 1916 that shows the hotel. It was quite the place. At the corner of Coleman and Winter. Currently, the hotel doesn't exist anymore. It's currently right next to the U.S. Post Office, or it's actually the site of the current U.S. Post Office in Marlin. Marlin's not a huge town. It's about 4,000, 5,000 people, and wasn't too different. It's not too much bigger now than it was at the time. You'll see right there in the Sanborn map that there are railroad tracks that go right by the hotel. Going to the next slide, we find that, and this is a slide. This is from Monty's presentation. He covers a lot of he shows on here the various baseball sites around Marlin. So we have the Arlington Hotel at the upper middle there, and the same picture that we showed earlier is up there as well. If you follow the train tracks down about 1.5 miles, you get to Emerson Park, and you can see the picture in the lower left of the screen. Various Giants walking to Emerson Park in 1913 on their way from the hotel to the park for their spring training workouts. They would do 2 workouts a day, as we'll see here in a little bit. Christy Mathewson is the photographer who took that picture, which is, and you can see Jeff Tesreau in the front, and some various other Giants are recognizable from the photo. Emerson Park is named after the postmaster of Marlin at the time, and it will be fairly significant. I'll get into that in a little bit. On the far left of the screen, you see Rhymes Park, which doesn't exist anymore. It's a residential neighborhood now, but there is a Rhymes Avenue that cuts through where it used to be. And on the far right side is the East Side Fairgrounds, which were a spring training site before Emerson Park was built. So moving to the next slide. Marlin, as we said, the Arlington Hotel was rebuilt in 1901, and not too much later, the teams decided that it would be a good place to have spring training. It would have the mineral springs, it had the sites. It was quiet. It was out. It was not one of the big cities. It wasn't going to attract a lot of vices, or wasn't going to have a lot of attractions that vice related. That's places like Hot Springs would have. So the Chicago White Sox tried it in 2004, St. Louis Cardinals in 2005, Reds in 2006 and 2007. Philadelphia Athletics were also there in 2007, although they only overlapped with the Reds stay by about 4 days. Those training experiences were all at the East Side Fairgrounds. Going to the next slide, the New York Giants were being a little bit peripatetic as well. They they were originally owned by Andrew Friedman, who was notoriously cheap. So the Giants didn't travel for their spring training until the team was purchased by John Brush. And then they started to go various other places. So Savannah, Georgia for 3 years, Memphis, all the way to Los Angeles in 2007, before they settled on Marlin Springs. And what they liked about Marlin was that, as I said, it was remote. It wasn't, it was close enough to where they could get by train to other Texas cities, but they didn't necessarily have to deal with the temptations of those cities. So 1908, if we go to the next slide, shows a map of what the different spring training sites were in 1908. And you can see I did the National League ones in red and the American League ones in blue. And you can see Marlin there is the cross in the middle of Texas. But you can see they're pretty much scattered around the southern United States. There's a cluster of four teams that trained in Hot Springs of that year. I just picked a representative year, but or this is a pretty representative year, although I picked it because it's the first year the Giants are in Marlin. We have West Baden in Indiana, and we have Los Angeles in California, but otherwise it's pretty much the southern U.S., but scattered around a little bit. Moving to the next slide, the spring training in spring in the life of Marlin, Texas. The first thing that would happen would be that the groundskeeper would arrive to get the field in shape. This was an annual challenge. The hot summers and relentless sunlight and not much rain during much of the year made it very difficult to grow grass on the field in Marlin, Texas, and other places in the area as well. It became a factor for infielders trying to get some sense of how to play ground balls, because they would go train in a southern climate with not much in the way of cover on the infield and get used to fielding in fast moving grounders. And then they would go back north where they had grass on the infield as opposed to a skinned infield that was all dirt, and would have trouble adjusting for the first few weeks of the regular season. But they, so the groundskeepers that McGraw had, he originally had John Murphy, who was one of the groundskeeping Murphy brothers. Peter Morris did a great book called Level Playing Fields, which was about the Murphy brothers and their adventures in groundskeeping. And as with all of Peter's books, it's just fascinating. You sit there and you go, man, how did he find this stuff? It's amazing. But John Murphy was the groundskeeper for the Giants at the Polo Grounds until his death in 1913. And then Henry Fabian, who had played minor league ball with John McGraw in Cedar Rapids in the 1890s, and who had become a groundskeeper himself. McGraw lured him away from the St. Louis Browns to become the Polo Grounds groundskeeper. So either way, first thing that would happen is whoever the Polo Grounds groundskeeper would go down early in February to get the field in shape. Yanigans, I just love that word, yanigans. It can also mean colts, rookies, recruits, different, young players that were new, not necessarily part of the team, but would be invited to spring training so that McGraw could get a firsthand look at them. March 1st, the veterans would show up, and roughly, these are rough dates. They would vary from year to year, but this is roughly the timetable. Eventually, the veterans would report after McGraw had had a couple of weeks to look over the newcomers. Weekdays, there would be 2-a-day drills, morning and afternoon, and usually the afternoon drill was an intra-squad. I misspelled intra-squad. That's interesting. Didn't notice that before. But there would be intra-squad games that would where the usually would pit the veterans with the rookie pitchers against the younger players with the veteran pitchers, and they would usually the veterans would still win those games. On the weekends, they would split up the squad into 2 or sometimes 3 groups that would go play exhibition games against the the Texas League teams in Dallas and Fort Worth, or minor league teams in Waco and other places. Around that time, that's giving them a chance to evaluate the new talent and evaluate whether the existing players or the regular players are getting into shape for the regular season, or whether they need to lose some weight or pick up some skills or whatever. Around March 25th, they'll break camp. There will be the final roster cuts. And then usually what would happen is the city, like starting in 1910, the town of Marlin, Texas, would have a fish fry at the Falls of the Brazos River, which is now a park near Marlin. And it was a recreational spot even at the time. The Brazos River cut through Falls County, and the falls were an attraction. The team reciprocated starting in 1911 by hosting a ball where they'd bring in a band and people would dance, get to dance with the ball players from New York City and so forth. And so there would be a celebration hosted by both sides that would finish the spring training season. Then late March, early April, the teams would split up again into 2 or 3 teams and play exhibition games in southern cities en route to New York. This was a way to make some money to offset some of the spring training expenses. It was also a way for players or the team to dispose of reserve players. At the time, the Giants, all of the teams could have up to 8 minor league players on reserve, where the major league team had the rights to the players, and they would usually dispose of those players en route. So, for example, McGraw had relationships with Michael Finn in Mobile and various other cities in the South, where he would say, "Okay, I'll give you this player who's on my reserve list for the season, and I'll call them. I get the right to call them up if I need to." That sort of thing. So that's your typical Marlin, Texas spring training experience for the Giants during this period. Now, the Giants were in Marlin for about 11 years. One thing I found interesting is sort of why they stopped coming back. Although at the time, and we can go to the next slide here, at the time, it was unusual for teams to stay in one place for much longer, very long. But as I said, the Giants were in Marlin for 11 seasons. So it's interesting to look at why they might have moved. A couple of interesting articles there. On the one hand, we have the 1908 Fort Worth Star-Telegram reporting that, the Giants will be back. And the second paragraph there is talking about, every year they say there are rumors that they're not coming back, but they are coming back. But then the article on the right there is saying that there are some dark clouds on the horizons. They're not happy with the food, apparently, that's available in Marlin. Even though the Hotel Arlington was a nice hotel by the standards of the day, it was not apparently up to the standards of the New York, the denizens of New York. The article, this is a total sidebar, but the article mentions a fellow named Ed Turp, who ran a cafe near the Polo Grounds, and so they're joking that maybe, and that was frequented by figures of the day, and especially by the Giants at the time. And Terp shows up in the society, kind of in the sports pages and society pages. He was clearly one of the characters that seemed to revolve around the Giants and John McGraw during this period. And so they're joking that Terp's going to pull up and go cater the food in Marlin, Texas. He did not. He ended up moving to Havana, where he unfortunately contracted typhoid and died young, unfortunately. But I always find notes like that interesting. I would love to know more about Ed Terp. Moving to the next slide, this is the following season. World War I, of course, is going on by this point, and even though there was some doubt that the Giants would be able to go to Marlin to train in 1919, and even though the armistice has been signed and the shooting is over, there was still wartime restrictions in effect for 1919. John Foster, the secretary of the Giants, notifies Marlin that they won't be training there this year, and sends them an "It's not you, it's us" letter. The circumstances were forced upon us against our will. We only get 30 days for spring training. We're not allowed to train until March 22nd, so we can't go all the way to Texas, which is understandable to some extent. Moving to the next slide. So where did they go? Well, they ended up going quite a ways anyway, to Gainesville, Florida. Although Gainesville was more accessible by boat, it's still quite a ways away from New York. So one wonders whether or not the travel restrictions in World War I weren't apparently as serious as the ones in World War II, where teams had to train much closer to home. But they did find their way to Gainesville, Florida. Why? We'll find out in a moment. After they spent 1 year in Gainesville, then went back to Texas, but to San Antonio for 4 seasons. And then John McGraw started investing in Florida real estate. Dan Levitt did a presentation a couple of years ago at the SABR convention about Pennant Park and the bursting of the Florida land bubble and how that affected John McGraw's finances. But while that was going on, they ended up training in Tampa, St. Petersburg for about 4 years. Going to the next slide, why I mentioned why Gainesville. McGraw was one of these people who always had a good network going with him, either players that he had played with in the past, or he would cultivate showbiz personalities or finance personalities or whatever, and would try to make use of those connections when he could. So one of the reasons the Giants ended up in Gainesville had to do with, well, one, they got a sweet deal from the University of Florida where they could use the ball field, the lockers, and the baths free of charge. That was a nice deal. But there was also a local businessman named Charlie Harris who had played with for McGraw when McGraw had his first managing gig with the Baltimore Orioles in 1899. And Harris was one of the people who made the pitch to McGraw to come train in Gainesville. One thing that may have been a factor is that the Giants didn't make the decision to train in Gainesville until fairly late. You can see that the Fred Lieb article there is dated January 24th, just 9 days after Charles Stoneham purchased the Giants from the Hempstead family. And given that sale was in progress at the time, it probably had something to do with the late decision to train in Gainesville. There may certainly Stoneham must have had to sign off on the decision whether to train someplace else or not. Moving to the next one. Now when the Giants go back to San Antonio, we start hearing about all of the things that were wrong with Marlin. The El Paso Herald is particularly critical of Marlin and neglecting to make their city acceptable to McGraw because they're focused on the development of the oil industry. In other words, how dare you take care of your own financial needs when there's this major league team that wants to make camp there. Apparently, they were supposed to give all that up and cater to the outsiders, but people of Marlin have only themselves to blame for their town being passed up. They also do mention the weather in Marlin as opposed to San Antonio. They make the argument that San Antonio is a little milder, but the weather was a factor, certainly. And as we'll see in a moment, teams did start to migrate from some of the areas in the south to areas where the weather during this time of year was a little more predictable. Another factor in why San Antonio as opposed to some other place, if we move to the next slide, we see that one of the factors was deal was arranged by Harry J. Benson, president of the San Antonio Texas League Club. McGraw had certainly known Benson from having exhibitions in San Antonio and with the other Texas League owners as well. So you certainly would have been aware of Benson and would have had a relationship with them. But this is, again, one of those fascinating show business connections that McGraw had. Macklin Arbuckle, who is a Broadway actor, he's mostly a stage actor, cousin of Roscoe Arbuckle, who you may be aware of if you're a silent film fan, but cousin of he didn't do as much in the way of film, although he did do some film. But he certainly would have known McGraw during his Broadway days. McGraw was a member of the Lambs Club, which is an organization of showbiz types, and McGraw was a member and certainly had a lot of relationships with showbiz types. Some of the more famous ones that he buddied around with were DeWolf Hopper, who's famous for his rendition of Casey at the Bat, and I'm drawing a blank on his name, played by James Cagney and Yankee Doodle Dandy, George M. Cohan. That's the guy. So they were friends and so forth. So Arbuckle, no doubt, would have known McGraw from those days. And one of these interesting what ifs in show business history, Arbuckle is now back in his native San Antonio to start a new motion picture company. At the time, the motion picture industry was based in New York City, but was starting after 1915 or so, was starting to move to other places in the country where the sun was more reliable, where the conditions were a little more amenable for filmmaking. And it's one of the interesting what ifs. It was supposed that instead of going to Hollywood, California, the film industry were based in San Antonio, Texas today. How might life in the entertainment industry be different now? Interesting to speculate. So if we go to the next slide, 1918 does not look too different from the 1908 slide that we looked at earlier. There's still kind of a scattering of clubs around the southern states here. We still have this is the Giants last year in Marlin. We don't have the cluster in Hot Springs, Arkansas that we had before, but we still have a couple of teams there, and we have a scattering around throughout the South. Next slide, 1928, just to pick 10 years later, we're definitely seeing teams moving to Florida. And this, of course, is a trend that would continue until the teams are pretty much located for spring training purposes in either Florida or Arizona today. I have an open circle there. There weren't any teams training in Arizona in 1928, but the very next year, the Detroit Tigers would train there and become the first team to train in Arizona. So we're starting to see that migration here in the 1920s. So one of the things we talk about with Marlin is that, and we'll move to the next slide here, is Marlin is often considered to be the first permanent location first spring training site. And to me, that this is one area that fascinates me is what do we mean when we're talking about spring training, and how do we say something is a first spring training site or a first modern spring training site or a first permanent spring training site? The modern sense of the term, we're talking about an event where a baseball team does certain activities. And I think it's important to consider this as an evolution rather than something that sprung full blown from the mind of Albert Spalding or John McGraw or Branch Rickey or whoever founding father you want to pick. There's definitely an evolution in how spring training comes into the picture. So we see there are 5 things I'm calling out here, more or less chronological order, and we'll look at each of these in turn. Practice games, either intra-squad or against other ball clubs, which don't count in league championship standings. Was the Marlin experience the first to do this? Definitely not. We'll see that in a moment. Physical training designed to prepare players for the demands of the upcoming season. Again, the Giants Marlin experience was not the first to do this, but it was definitely, I think, a step forward in some respects. Setting up a camp away from hometown and family for purposes of team building. And this is different from touring from city to city. You're setting up a camp, you're having everybody go there and so forth. Evaluation of prospects and roster selection. And then the last is skills development, pitchers learning new pitches, base running practice, strategy sessions, things like that. So where does the Giants Marlin experience fit in with this? Going to the next slide, let's take practice games, either intra-squad or against other ball clubs, which do not count in league standings. To me, the line here is, I'm drawing a line here between the 1870 and 1871 seasons. In 1870, we have the Cincinnati Red Stockings, the Chicago White Stockings, and the New York Mutuals all traveling south to play games in the month of April and so forth. They weren't league games because there wasn't a league yet. The National Association would be founded in 1871. In 1871, we have these same teams making southern trips. Well, not the Cincinnati, but definitely the Chicago White Stockings and the New York Mutuals made southern trips in 1871 prior to the regular season, because now we have a regular season. The National Association basically said, okay, you have to play X number of games starting May 1st of the year. Going to the next slide. So looking at 1870 in a little more detail, and I didn't look at the Mutuals closely, but this is the Chicago White Stockings experience. They played 2 games in St. Louis in April of 1870 and then went down to New Orleans to play 5 games. These weren't considered training games. The newspapers described them as match games. And they seem to have been treated at the time as serious games. Now, the Chicago club did play some games against local amateur clubs in Chicago in April, but those seem to have been training purposes. So we could, if we wanted to, make the argument that Chicago was doing spring training at home in 1870. Skipped to the 1871 on the next slide, and we're now the newspaper is clearly calling, well, at least the Chicago Tribune is clearly describing the game against Cleveland on May 8th as the White Stockings' first contest for the championship in 1871. The Southern games that they played prior to that, so for example, they went to New Orleans and played several teams just for practice sake, and then they had a schedule of games that they were playing throughout March and April prior to the May 8th game in Cleveland. So to me, that's clearly a spring training trip. It may not have been based in one location, but it may have been a tour of different cities, but it was clearly a spring training trip as opposed to playing serious match games. So going to the next slide, physical training designed to prepare players for the demands of the upcoming season. So 1872, Boston introduces, this is Harry Wright, Boston introduces preseason gym workouts. So they're training in Boston, but prior to the start of the season, the Red Stockings are that's not a picture of the Red Stockings. It's just a cool picture of a gymnasium that I thought was kind of fun. Over time, these preseason workouts will become standard and will become stricter. They're initially limited largely because at this time teams didn't have a lot of control over the players, and you can argue whether that was a good thing or not, but they couldn't necessarily say, show up here and do some workout. The players would say, well, what are you going to pay me to do these preseason workouts? So they weren't standard at this point, but they're beginning to become a factor. The third thing we talked about, and on the next slide, setting up a camp away from hometown and family for purposes of team building. The first one, this is Peter Morris again, Game of Inches, points out 1884 Columbus, the Columbus Buckeyes of the American Association, and their manager, Gus Schmeltz, set up a training camp away from the town and got everybody together and got everybody working out. And then that's 2 years before the more famous trip by the Chicago White Stockings to Hot Springs, which is featured in the first issue of Sporting News. So that's the one everybody thinks of as the first spring training, but it was actually preceded, as we've seen, by other evolutionary steps towards spring training. So could this have happened any earlier? Well, again, it's not until this period in the middle 1880s with the reserve clause and other sorts of mechanisms of team control over players that teams could say, you're going to show up here and do participate in this spring training. So it couldn't have happened much earlier. This one where you're saying to people, show up here and on such and such a date and be ready to go. You really couldn't do that any earlier than this. Although it's possible we might find something in 1883, who knows? In any case, the practice is firmly established by the 1890s, where teams are going someplace other than their hometown for spring training. So we come to the question of what is the first permanent spring training site? And we've talked about the Giants in Marlin. The Giants not only went to Marlin every year, but they were granted the deed to the practice field in 1911, and they had ownership of the field for as long as they wanted to train here. And in fact, the Giants did have ownership of the field until the 1970s, long after they had stopped training there. That's certainly a contender for, if we wanted to say what's the first permanent spring training site, certainly a contender. But I think we also have to look at the Pittsburgh Pirates, who trained in Hot Springs from 1901 to 1916. Both the Giants and the Pirates' experience is very unusual in that most teams were still bouncing from town to town, either to get a different deal from the local towns or cities that they were practicing in, or just to shake things up a little bit. But so the Pirates and the Giants stand out as being unusual in this period. The difference between the Giants and the Pirates is that the Pirates didn't own the Whittington Field. But they had an exclusive lease. No other teams could train there, even though other teams did train in Hot Springs. The Pirates were the only ones who got to use this field. Is that a distinction with a difference? Is there a significant difference between saying you own the field versus you have an exclusive lease to it? I would argue the Pirates were the first permanent spring training site. The Pirates and Hot Springs were. As an aside, I have to mention the boiling out conventions that the Deadball Era Committee did in Hot Springs from 2002 to 2010. We used to meet in Hot Springs and visit the different spring training sites. And Whittington Field, which is shown here, you can see where home plate is. And you can see where there's a grandstand. On the side of the hill that goes beyond the third baseline, you can still see concrete structure there. The whole thing, the field now is a parking lot. And the first year we went to Hot Springs, there were 8 of us who were standing in this parking lot trying to figure out where home plate was. And somebody from it was the Weyerhaeuser paper office at the time, which is the building would have been in left field. And somebody came out to figure out what the heck these guys were doing walking around their parking lot. But and once we explained to them, he kind of shook his head, but didn't chase us away or anything. There's now, if you go through Hot Springs, there are now these history walk. There's a history walk with plaques, and a lot of the plaques call out the spring training sites, which is pretty cool. But at the time, they hadn't put those up in Hot Springs yet. But the Robinson-Kell chapter of SABR was instrumental in getting a lot of those sites recognized as plaque worthy. But if you go there, you'll still see some concrete footings for stands on that hill next to the parking lot. It's kind of cool. Now, are there earlier claimants for first permanent spring training site? I don't think there are. I think you have to either be looking at the Giants or the Pirates at this point. And then fourth item that we had on the next slide is evaluation of prospects and roster selection. Certainly, McGraw, as I said, was, I think, unusual at the time in wanting to work with the rookies, the Anigans, the Colts, whatever you wanted to call them, prior to the regulars showing up. You see a lot of stories in 1890s spring training where new players would be invited to spring training, but they were not welcomed by the regular players. So they were not allowed to take batting practice. The attitude was, hey, this kid's trying to take my job. So McGraw definitely had the attitude that he wanted to see what these guys could do without the interference of the regular players. Now, is there precedent for that? Did the Baltimore Orioles in the 1890s do something similar? Did any other teams do something similar? I haven't researched it to that extent yet, and it would be interesting. I think it would be an interesting subject. There's also the question of, currently the practice is not rookies show up first, it's pitchers and catchers report first. And when did the practice evolve, and what was the reasoning at the time? I think that would be an interesting study as well. The last item that we had in the realm of evolution of spring training is skills development. You cannot read anything about the McGraw experience, the Giants' experience at Marlin, without hearing about the sliding pits. This is where players would practice sliding into bases. McGraw credited sliding practice with the Giants' success as base stealers. The Giants in 1911 stole 347 bases, which, even though it was a 154-game season, that's still a major league record. Even with the longer season, nobody's caught that. And McGraw also credited the sliding practice not only with being able to steal more bases, but avoiding injuries to both the base stealer and the second baseman or shortstop who was covering the bag. So, but what's interesting is that even though McGraw is usually credited with this, sometimes Branch Rickey is credited with inventing the sliding pit, but that's completely wrong. But actually, again, coming back to Peter Morris's research, preseason sliding practice goes back to at least 1887, and we have here our friend Gus Schmeltz, who is we encountered in 1884 in Columbus, who is now the manager at Cincinnati, who's doing indoor preseason drills in Cincinnati, including sliding practice. I don't know the details of this. I gather that they were sliding on tarps in a gym somewhere, but I don't know the details of this. But Gus Schmeltz. Okay, does anybody know anything about Gus Schmeltz? I don't know any more than these two things, and I really want to know more about Gus Schmeltz. The last thing I'll talk about here is pitchers learning new pitches, and this was fun. I've spent a lot of time looking at the Giants in 1911, particularly, and one of the features of that spring training was Jeff Tesreau, who made his major league debut in 1912, but was with the Giants in spring training in 1911 and started to work on his spitball. Christy Mathewson was also working on a new pitch in 1911 that the newspapers called the quiver pitch. And nobody really wanted to go into much detail about what the quiver pitch was or what it did or what it did, other than the fact that one newspaper referred to it as something that Mathewson would throw after wetting his fingers, which I think is a genteel way of somebody wanted to say, how do you say Christy Mathewson's throwing a spitball without saying Christy Mathewson's throwing a spitball? I think some people just found the idea of the Christian gentleman throwing a spitball to be a little distasteful, so they called it the quiver pitch. But that's just a hypothesis on my part. In any case, about 3 games into the regular season, it wasn't working for him, so he gave it up. I think other skill development for spring training would be a rich vein for further research as we're looking at the evolution. What other skills became prominent in the repertoire of training and going beyond just getting into shape, but actually refining one's approach at the plate, one's approach in the field, and so forth. I think that'd be a rich vein for further research as well. And that's the last slide I have here is the picture of the Giants in 1913 spring training. I don't own this card. If anybody has one for sale, I'd love to have it. But this has Jim Thorpe and Christy Mathewson right in front and center in the 3rd row there, and I think it's a gem. So,
what do you think? We talking about spring training for sure. What do you think is there a real purpose for spring training today, do you think?
It's hard to say because these days players are pretty much trying to stay in shape 12 months out of the year, and there isn't this whole boiling out thing or getting rid of the winter fat thing that previous generations would have been looking at. I think that's one thing about I think there's still some value to it in terms of team building and so forth, and certainly development of younger players. But it's certainly different. It's certainly evolved to the point where it's different in the sense of players not having to necessarily approach spring training to get ready for the season, because I think players are pretty much expected to be in shape 12 months out of the year.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff that you've given us this evening. This is definitely the deluxe version of the presentation you gave in Dallas just a few months ago. Joanne Hulbert in the chat, the quiver ball, a corkscrew floater thrown by Christy Mathewson in 1911 that had a peculiar and deceiving double break after he wet his fingers. And that definition was provided by one R.J. Lesch in the Baseball Dictionary, page 6830.
I'll have to look that up. I don't remember. But that's correct. I don't. Is that Paul Dixon's Baseball Dictionary?
Go ahead. Joanne's going to get it out. There she is. There it is. Joanne, unmute and say something so we can see that.
Yes, this is everybody has to have one of these in order to have a true baseball library. This is Paul Dixon's Baseball Dictionary. This is 3rd edition. I do believe there's before after that. Yeah, this is the 3rd. And it is essential reading for anything. And he was such a great guy. I remember at the Washington, D.C. Convention, a few of us sat down with him, and we had all brought a few terms that we had found in searching and everything to see what he would think of them and try to figure out what they were. And the one that I brought at that time was a Christian Science bingo doesn't get you anywhere, it doesn't get you anything. And trying to figure out what is a Christian Science bingo. And it was in a sports story and everything. And we're all scratching our heads and couldn't find anything. And it was written in the Boston Herald by one of the sports writers at the time. This is Deadball Era. And I've never been able to find it. And I even knew, his grandson, the writer's grandson, is a friend of mine, and I even ran it by him. He just thought it was a riot because, unfortunately, his grandfather died 1 year before he was born. But then, neither here nor there. But this is such an essential book that whenever we come up with terms, and that's when I saw the one that you put up there about the quiver ball, and I always have it right here, right by my chair.
Wow.
And I bring it out in order to look it up because I also used to have this thing about Christy Mathewson. Okay, I got over it. I moved on, but I found him to be a fascinating baseball player and just an all-around person, and his whole biography is quite interesting. And so I do have a photograph on my wall of him along with Smokey Joe Wood. 1912 World Series. And the two of them seem to be like just jawboning or commiserating as they're standing there. I'm talking about pitcher stuff, I'm sure. But I don't think they were giving each other away any of their secrets.
You can see over my shoulder here a couple of
I've been watching that. Yes. Yeah, exactly. But there are many fascinating people. And I have to agree with you. Every single book by Peter Morris is an absolute every single one of them. And because of the way that he goes out and researches things, but brings in a lot of other little details around it. It's not just a straight thing about, Joe Schmo, he hit 30 home runs and blah, blah. It's not that at all. It just brings in the whole picture of who he was, what he was, and all of the people that he did biographies on. It's fantastic in all of his books. I like that. And I highly recommend it. If you haven't read any Peter Morris, get out there and get the whole library. It really is worth it.
For the record, there is a copy of that book in the Art Springsteen Memorial Library here with our chapter. I don't want anyone to think the chapter is lacking.
Well, I certainly think that Art would absolutely have had one of these books in his library. So
he had a couple.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Hey, listen, if y'all got a question for our presenter, RJ Lesch, tonight, Mark Hoyle knows what to do. Go down to the bottom of the screen and hit the react button. You'll see another button marked raise hand. Raise your hand. We'll get you in line to ask questions of RJ tonight. Mark, go.
Great presentation, but this is just to piggyback off our pre-presentation discussion we had. I thought this came out in 71. So,
yep. That was the revival in 71. I think it lasted about a dozen shows.
Yeah, some good pictures inside there, but yeah, had added to the collection.
How it got a cast recording, I'll never know. I was little. This is really interesting stuff because it shows us the genesis of spring training, really, and how and where it got started. It's really fascinating stuff that we don't talk about much. We talk about the numbers and the plays on the field, but never or rarely the training or the back office portion of baseball. Paul Hensler has got a comment. Paul, go. Unmute, my friend. There you go.
Okay. You can see my pretty face now, too?
I can see most of it. There he is.
Okay.
There he is. Go, man. Go.
Bruce, thanks for the opportunity. And wonderful presentation. But I'm specifically looking at anything anecdotal to a good serious article, perhaps, on how all these teams travel from one place to the other at that time. Now, obviously, the railroad played a major role in it, but if Mr. Lesch has anything that he is willing to share, I'd love to contact him offline through email just to learn about this, if at all possible. It's in relation to my current project.
Oh, okay. Mostly trains, either having a special train or a regular route, but that there were a few examples. There was one time when the Giants were in Marlin when McGraw flew from Marlin to Waco on a plane, which was like extremely rare at the time, but there was an Army Air Corps base in Waco, so you got to have an airplane trip there. But obviously, commercial air travel was many years away, of course. But that made the papers in almost everywhere. But yeah, mostly train travel.
Not surprising. Thank you.
Last one for tonight is Troy Olszewski. Troy, how you doing, man?
Hi, camera tried making it work, gave up eventually. So sorry about the black screen, but
That's okay.
I'm curious as to maybe I somehow missed this, but how would McGraw make sure the players knew what day to show, or was there even a hard date deadline to show up? Like how we have pitchers and catchers show up 2 weeks early. I'm just how did that information get out?
Usually by mail or I suppose telegram too, but usually teams would mail out their contracts to players in January and and basically give the information saying, "Hey, show up at such and such a place." The Giants had different ways of organizing the travel. Like they might say, okay, so 1911, which is the year I'm most familiar with, there were 5 or 6 players that assembled in St. Louis. So got from wherever they were to St. Louis and then took the train from St. Louis to Marlin. There was another group of players that took a steamship. I forgot to mention this when the gentleman asked earlier, but took a ship from New York to Galveston. I think it was Galveston, maybe, yeah, and then took the train from Galveston to Marlin. But so they might organize groups of travel groups, or like the New York group might all take the train together from New York to whatever route they were taking. But mostly having to do, the kickoff for that would be, here's your contract for the upcoming season. Or if you're a recruit, it's like, I'm going to send this recruit a letter saying, hey, no promises, but you're welcome to attend spring training this year. Be here by be at this place by such and such a date.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
I liked your spitter, no, only hard curve.
It's
echoing the Gaylord Perry.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Very interesting presentation. The deluxe presentation, I might add. This was the added benefits of it all. We really appreciate it, RJ.
Thanks.
Next week, Monday, January 12th. I got the date right, Alec. I got it right. So it's the 12th. We're going to have our old friend Steve Rennie back to give us his presentation on baseball in the Arctic. Yes, you heard that right. Baseball in the Arctic. And Wednesday, the 14th, we're also going to have a special presentation with the great David Firstman, his Sabre 53 talk, Chris Davis, Mr. 247. So 2 great presentations next week that you're not going to want to miss. The sign-up links are available in the chapter meeting booklet and at the Sabre events calendar. Alec in the chat, perfect record on dates for 26. You don't talk about a perfect game when it's happening. Come on. And finally, if you're a baseball fan watching on YouTube and you like what you see, please like this video and subscribe to our channel to be alerted to each of our weekly uploads. And if you are not yet a member. You need to join the Society for American Baseball Research, the premier baseball community, offering an amazing baseball buffet of options to explore your fandom. SABR boasts more than 35 different research committees, over 80 regional chapters, and innumerable opportunities to connect with baseball minds across the world, just like RJ Lesch. For more information, go to sabre.org today. RJ, you're fantastic. Thank you very much, my friend. Appreciate you. Let's get everybody out of here. We'll see you next Monday night. Have a great night, folks.